When I went to Argentina to ride some trains, everybody I talked to said that I had to check out this specific one. So let's go see what all the excitement is about. In the 19th and early 20th century, there were trolley systems all over the world, and the companies that operated these trolleys had a problem. On weekdays, they were making plenty of money transporting people to and from their jobs. But on the weekends, nobody was riding the trolleys. What they did was build theme parks and other attractions at the end of the line so that people would use the trolleys on Saturdays and Sundays as well. Now, we may think of this as something that happened a long time ago, but around Buenos Aires, Argentina, they tried this exact thing in the 1990s. Today, we are riding the Tren de la Costa, a light rail system that was built specifically to cater towards tourists. They built a theme park at the end of the line, and the stations themselves are attractions too. We're going to explore whether this is a model that works or not. Now, the thing about the Tren de la Costa is that it doesn't leave from the city center of Buenos Aires, where we are. So first we have to take a different train to reach it, and that train leaves from Retiro Station. There are actually 3 separate Retiro stations, all next to each other. 4 if you count the subway station, 5 if you count the nearby bus station. Each Retiro station has its own unique building and serves a different railway system. In future videos, we will look at the other 2 stations, but today we are using the biggest of the 3, Retiro Mitre. This station opened in 1915. The steel skeleton was built in England and then shipped over and reassembled here. The main hall has plenty of shops to buy supplies and food from before your journey. We will pay using our Sube card, the handy little card that we've been using for all public transportation here in Argentina. Retiro is the starting point for long-distance train service to Cordoba. However, the vast majority of people using this station are taking the frequent electric suburban trains of the Mitre line. That includes us. This train will take us up to the Bartolomé Mitre station, which is where we will transfer to the main feature of today's video, the Tren de la Costa. This specific train may look familiar if you've seen my other Argentinian videos. It is an electric multiple unit built by Chinese company CSR. They have been in service since 2014. The Sarmiento line and the Roca line use these exact same train sets. The Roca line trains are powered using overhead wires, but on the Sarmiento line and here on the Mitre line, they use a third rail powered at 800 volts. Top speed for these trains is 120 kilometers per hour or 75 miles per hour. Although for much of the journey today, we will be traveling well below that top speed. Our tracks are broad gauge, much wider than the standard gauge found throughout most of the world. They are the same width as in India or on BART in the San Francisco Bay Area of the United States. As we depart Retiro Station, we pass the Railway Museum on the left. This museum will be featured in a future video as well, so subscribe to Trains Are Awesome if you want to see that. On the opposite side, some long-distance coaches are waiting in the yard, getting ready for their next trip. For the first few minutes, we run parallel to the Belgrano Norte and San Martin lines, each coming from its own part of the Retiro complex and going to its own part of the Buenos Aires suburbs. It's early in the afternoon, so the train is quite empty. Nothing like the mad crushes that we've seen on some of the other lines. The seats are hard, but fine for short distances, laid out in a 2x2 configuration. There are some free spaces near the doors, as well as bicycle racks. Anybody want any pizza? I bet this guy does. Above the doors, you will find maps of the 3 electric branches of the Mitre line, with the stops that we will be making illuminated. If you want to ride the Tren de la Costa, you have to get on a train bound for Bartolomé Mitre. The other branches do not offer that transfer. You can take a different branch straight to Tigre, the same destination that we're going to today. But I hope that this video will show you why the route we're taking today is the best way to go. The network that today is called the Mitre line totals 180 kilometers or 110 miles long, made up of different branches, with 5 different passenger services. 3 of these services are electric, and the other 2 are diesel, running farther out of the city, less frequent service. I'd like to try some of those next time I visit. The first branch of today's Mitre line opened in 1857 as the Buenos Aires Northern Railway. a British railway company. In fact, many of Argentina's earliest railway lines were British endeavors. Soccer, which of course is massively popular in Argentina today, was first introduced to the country by British railway workers. That first line was used by people traveling from the north of the country to Buenos Aires, but there was a problem. It stopped south of the river, and since the river wasn't always navigable, sometimes there was simply no way to travel. So by 1876, the Buenos Aires and Campana opened a new route traveling further west to be able to transport these passengers. This railway proved to be massively successful, and it was eventually extended all the way to Rosario, renaming itself the Buenos Aires and Rosario. On a more local scale, the government granted permission for a railway entrepreneur to build a short line from Buenos Aires to Tigre, directly competing with the already existing Buenos Aires Northern. He couldn't raise the funds though, so he sold the rights for the railway to the Buenos Aires and Rosario. They built the section to Bartolomé Mitre in 1891 and up to Tigre in 1896, nicknaming the line the Tren del Bajo. Ironically, by 1908, both of the competing railway companies had been absorbed by the Central Argentinian Railways. Now, one company owned two local lines running directly parallel to each other. In 1948, all the private railway companies were nationalized. All the lines of the Central Argentinian Railway were renamed the Mitre Railway, named after the former Argentinian president, Bartolomé Mitre. Pretty soon, the government-run railways decided that two parallel branches were not necessary, so they shut down passenger service on the northern half of the branch in 1962. Running the occasional freight service to Tigre for a few more years before shutting that down too. And so for 3 decades, trains only ran as far as Bartolomé Mitre on this branch, with service to Tigre provided by the other branch. Bartolomé Mitre Station, end of this branch. Here is where we transfer to the Tren de la Costa. By the way, today I am traveling with my good friend Nonstop Eurotrip. We had a great few days in BA together, and you should all subscribe to his channel for reviews of long-distance travel around the world. We've arrived at the Bartolomé Mitre station, about 40 minutes after departing Retiro. This absolutely charming station opened in 1891, and to exit the station and transfer, you must walk to the front of the train. The tracks end, and in front of the station you will find the Maipu Avenue. Across the street is another train station, appropriately named Avenida Maipu. Fortunately, we do not have to cross the busy street. An overpass has been built, allowing for an easy connection between the Bartolomé Mitre and Avenida Maipu stations. If the Tren de la Costa sign isn't making us excited yet, the giant #Maipu sign will. The overpass has elevators as well. When this connection opened in the 1990s, it was filled with stores. However, in the 2010s, the corridor became mostly abandoned and it fell into disrepair. Thankfully, it has since been fully renovated, and I have to say it looks pretty nice. The escalators bring you right down to the platforms for the Tren de la Costa. We will tap our sube again to gain access to the platform, something that I suspect these feline fare evaders did not do. Then it's a matter of waiting for the Tren de la Costa to arrive. It may seem silly for two train lines operated by the same agency to have two separately named stations connected by an overpass. There's a reason for things being this way, but I will discuss that once we're on board. The Tren de la Costa normally runs every 20 minutes, from 6 in the morning to 10 in the evening on weekdays. Service starts 2 hours later on the weekends and holidays. Here comes our train now, a light rail vehicle built in 1995 by Spanish company CAF. Honestly, it was hard to get good shots of the interior because the train was absolutely packed. It's a short train, only 2 cars, but still, there were definitely over 100 people on board. Makes sense, it was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in spring. Well, I said to my friend, I see now why everybody keeps recommending this train. Thankfully, after a few stops, we were able to get a seat. The windows have curtains, which I thought was almost humorously vintage. The Tren de la Costa is unlike any of the other trains around Buenos Aires. Maybe it sounds strange, but it kind of feels like you are riding into vacation. Accompanying the tracks is a trail, in which people are leisurely strolling or cycling. The stations all have stores built into them, and a few of them even have cafes with patio seating right on the platform, where people were soaking up the sun and enjoying their beverages. This relaxed, fun design is intentional. The Tren de la Costa uses the line that we talked about earlier, the one that was closed in 1962. In the 1990s, plans were drawn up to turn this abandoned stretch into a tourist line. The tracks were re-gauged to standard gauge, making them narrower than they were previously. An overhead wire was installed instead of the previous third rail, and a company was founded to run the Tren de la Costa. It was owned by a much larger company called SCP, who had just made a bunch of money on some energy investments. Several new stations were built as part of this project as well. Apparently, many of the existing stations housed squatters before the line's conversion, so they had to be evicted. Finally, in April 1995, the first train entered service. These light rail vehicles were actually green instead of blue when service first started. Because the 2 lines were now incompatible and operated by different companies, they considered it acceptable to have the 2 connecting terminals separated a little bit. Almost every station was built to be a destination in and of itself. They include public art, historical information, supermarkets, and coffee shops. Las Barrancas station even hosts a flea market on the platforms. Like I said, when you're traveling down the line, you can feel the relaxed atmosphere. The main attraction, though, was an amusement park built at the end of the line, the Parque de la Costa. This opened in 1997. You may know that around the world, tram operators in the 19th and early 20th centuries had built theme parks at the end of their lines to get people to use their system even on the weekends. Tren de la Costa was doing the same thing just in the 1990s, a little bit later than everybody else. Unfortunately, their model of a tourist-oriented light rail began to fall apart almost immediately, as a recession hit and people were just less likely to spend money on this. Opening a casino at the theme park helped to offset the decline somewhat, but it wasn't enough to keep money rolling in. So trains fell into disrepair, frequencies were cut dramatically, and they couldn't rely on government subsidies because they were classified as a tourist railway. In 2011, though, the government did begin to pay the staff's salaries, and in 2013, operation of the line was taken over by the government altogether. That's why today it is operated by Trenes Argentinos. They were able to fix the broken trains and restore frequencies on the line. More importantly, since the 2020s, they have gotten rid of the separate fare system that existed for the Tren de la Costa, and they've integrated it with the rest of the region's public transportation fare system. All these improvements have resulted in more ridership. The line was super popular when it first opened, but ridership had completely plummeted in the following years. But now it's climbing back up again. So does opening a tourist train work in this day and age? I think what the Tren de la Costa shows us is that it can, as long as it is also useful for non-tourist purposes. Service every 20 minutes, low fares, that's a reliable transit system. Stations that people want to go to, that's very nice too. It's really the best of both worlds. If anything, I would use the example of this line to suggest that more transit systems should incorporate shops and restaurants into their stations. I think it shows that if a station is more than just a place to wait for your train, it dramatically improves the atmosphere, and there's nothing wrong with attracting a few people that are not commuters. Anyway, we've arrived at Delta Station, the end of the line.
Well, that was a delightful ride. I mean, the train was very crowded, but such a beautiful route. There was a trail running along the line the entire time, and every station had shops or a market or a restaurant.
Over on the right side, we see the aforementioned theme park. In 1999, some people went into a coma from a ride that went too fast here, which is just a crazy fact that I had to share. We're not here for roller coasters though, we are here to explore the river Delta. See, the city of Tigre, named after a mythical jaguar that legend says used to live here, is located on the Paraná Delta, a fascinating place that is best toured by boat.
We're gonna ride a boat now.
There are public ferries here, but we've chosen to get a guided tour boat. We can learn more about the region that we're sailing through. Tickets for this tour were quite reasonably priced, and we got an hour-long tour with information in both Spanish and English. Luckily, we snagged some seats near the front of this wooden vessel by some windows that were open.
Very comfortable seats on this boat, so that's a win.
The next hour we spent cruising through one of the most fascinating places I've ever been to in my entire life. The delta is huge, made up of many islands. With water everywhere and not too many bridges, many of these islands are quite difficult to access. Nevertheless, they are home to a community that is adapted to this lifestyle in certain interesting ways. The tour is incredibly detailed. For example, they share that a house on one of these islands tends to cost between $30,000 or $120,000 US. Of course, a price tag cannot always accurately reflect the challenges of living in a place, and here, errands that to most of us would seem fairly easy to complete can be quite difficult due to the isolation. For example, groceries. Instead of having to go to a grocery store on the mainland, there is a ship that sails through the island chains every week, delivering groceries, gas, water, etc. When I was a little kid, my grandparents lived on an island in the Netherlands in a very small village, and although they could and often did just drive to the grocery store in a different village, there was a mobile grocery store that drove in every week, and I always loved visiting that with my grandma, so this was cool to see something like that in boat form. There are kids who live in the Delta and they have to go to school, so there are schools on the islands, but they only meet from 10 to 2, and the kids are entitled to free rides on the ferry system so that there's no trouble going to and from their educations. And then in terms of religion, there are churches here as well, but they tend to only meet once every 2 to 3 weeks, again because it's just more effort to access. I think what I liked about the tour, especially since we have been talking about tourist attractions a lot today, is that yeah, sure, it showed some famous monuments like the Sarmiento House, which was the home of Domingo Sarmiento, the son of Argentina, and is now completely enclosed in glass to protect it from the elements, but it also showed a lot of parts of normal life here. And of course, you got a great look at some of the beautiful nature. I was really hoping to see a capybara, or a carpincho as they're called here, but unfortunately none showed up today. I'll just have to come back. If you are a tourist visiting Buenos Aires and you have some time, I highly recommend taking the Tren de la Costa and then going for a tour the Delta at Tigre. It is an unforgettable experience, especially on a gorgeous day like today. If you are in Buenos Aires specifically to see trains like I was, I would also recommend the Tren de la Costa, but not before you've done some of my higher recommendations first.
To the left, we see how the flora changes.
Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. In our next video from Argentina, we will be taking the train back to the city, but we're going to be taking a different route on one of the most fun trains we've been on. You won't want to miss it, so subscribe to Trains Are Awesome. In the meantime, enjoy the other content that we have coming your way. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.